I will start by saying there was more to the story. Everybody asks me, well, how did it end? How did it really end? Well, okay, the truth is, after I graduated from community college, I went home, and it was that night, and then the next night, I spent a long time writing a story, and it was about my mother, and it was about something so menial. Should I set a timer this time, or, okay. It was about my life, and my mother at the time lived in a FEMA trailer that I had purchased for her, and she had beautiful tomato planters made out of recycled enormous tractor tires. And I just wrote this story about my mother. And I never planned to do anything with it. And then one day I was coming home from work, and I saw in the mailbox that my story had been published by a really big magazine. And they gave me a check for $25. So I was a professional. And it said, sorry, this story had been submitted by someone who chooses to remain anonymous, who would only go by the name Sean's wife. And that changed my life forever. And after I had that story published, I drove just way off into the wilderness, kind of not knowing where I was going. And I went to this Piggly Wiggly with the light on and the doors open. I walked in, and as I was checking out, I saw a woman operating the cashier desk, and she had a big, tall beehive hairdo and cat-eye glasses, and it was my 5th grade teacher. And I walked through the cashier checkout line, and I had a Coca-Cola and a pack of peanuts that I had put into the Coca-Cola, and I'd been sipping it as I went through the store, because professional writers do that. And as I was checking out, she said, "Oh my God, it's you." And I said, yeah, it's me. And she said, "What do you do for a living?" And that's the story. I'll be the first to admit to you, and you can probably tell by everything I'm saying, I've never done a workshop before. I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. I don't know what to tell you, as a matter of fact, until you ask me a question. I usually say that I don't have a whole lot to say about the subject. And then someone will ask me a question, and I find out that I'm like my mother. I can talk for hours, which you all witnessed this morning. So I'm going to open it up. I don't know what we want, what we're interested in, but if I do hear what we're interested in, I'll be happy to share anything that I have learned, anything that I know about writing. Yes, ma'am. All right, the different types of writing that I do are the main thing that has done anything for me is I write a daily column. It started online, but it was in the newspaper column format because this column was also run in a little tiny newspaper where I lived in Northwest Florida. So I wrote it in the columnist style, which fascinates me because the columnist style is it's an art form that's disappearing in America. It's being traded in for people who work for BuzzFeed or all these other internet places where you get your information. So columnists back in the day were the people who were really disseminating some wonderful ideas and some awesome bits of life and humor, daily life. Today, those same people who might have been columnists are now writing articles with the titles like 30 worms you might have in your body right now. Or 5 reasons why you look like a Disney princess character, or something ridiculous like that. So I love old columnists. I try to read them as many as I can, all the way back to the golden age in sports writing in early 30s New York. There's a prose and a beauty to it. They can say so much in 400 words. So that's the one thing that I have worked at the hardest. Because I believe that's an art all into itself. Who would have ever known it would have become so relevant in today's culture? That those 400-word columns work really well in the internet age. So we really are coming full circle. The second type of writing I do is fiction writing, which is a totally different animal. I write novels. That's another form. And then the third type I do is nonfiction writing, which is also with a different publisher. And the one thing that I would say about it all, when I've gone to like book events and things like that, people ask, what makes a good writer? I don't know. But what I do know is that all good writers that I've ever met are huge readers. Whatever it is, we can get so bogged down with writing. We can get so bogged down with trying to hone our craft that we forget to read. But it's reading good work that puts that syntax in your brain, and it makes it almost subconscious, where you can feel the flow of a sentence. That's my thought on it. Anyway, that did not answer your question. Maybe it did, but I'll take, what else you got? Yeah.
I just loved how you talked about your experience with your teacher and how you had to write that 100 words a day. It made me think, well, this has got you kind of primed for your career.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you got in that habit of writing?
Yeah. The habit of writing. I love art, so I went to when I was much younger, I wanted to be a painter. I did oil painting. I found out that I suck really bad at it. But I went to this art camp, and the art teacher, she was from California. She was this big old hippie, and she was just flowy clothes, and everything was cool, man. That's cool. And I just loved her, and she came around to my easel, and I was painting, and she was like, "That's cool, man. It looks really good, but you could bring so much out of yourself if you painted every day." And I remember that phrase, if you did it every day, if you made it more of a meditation, of a practice, you could learn so much more about your craft and about yourself. So when I started writing in earnest, I made a pact with myself that I would write just like I did in 6th grade. I would write every day. And it's amazing how much we have in here. And it's amazing how many of our ancestors used to journal every day. My mother, my grandmother, my dad, everybody journaled. When you go on trips and travel, they would journal about everything. It's amazing what a writing society we used to be. Apparently, within the last 100 years, our American vocabulary has lost 60% of the words we had 100 years ago. Our vocabulary has just started to shrink. So for me, writing every day gives you a chance to use words you would normally use. So that's how the column, for me, has helped me and transformed my view on how to communicate. I like to write every day as just a cleansing practice. I find that I can't really enjoy an experience going on a vacation, going anywhere, unless I write about it, because then I understand how I truly feel about it and what kind of work that vacation, if you will, has done on my psyche, and what it's really doing inside me. I can really process it if I write. So it's a tremendous gift to yourself to write every day, even if it's 100 words. Some of the greatest writers I've ever read or known have been able to do so much with 250 words, and that is, I think it was who's the weird guy? Faulkner, who said, and I'll get this wrong, but he said, the novel is the easiest thing to write. You have infinite words to say. You can use infinite words to describe anything. That's so easy. Short story, that's hard. You have little things to say, but like the news column, that's almost impossible sometimes. It scares a lot of people. Shorter than a news column, 250 words, it's a lot harder than it sounds. Yes?
Who do you recommend reading?
I love, for which style? Well, I love, there's a columnist who's dead now named Mike Royko from Chicago, who is the best. I love to read Mark Twain because his stuff is, it's amazing how relevant his humor is today. I just find that fascinating how somebody's humor changes over periods. I can't believe that his humor has endured for 100 years. It's amazing to me, or 200 years, 150 years, whatever. You had a question, ma'am.
Let's say you're covering or writing about a topic that's pretty mundane or common. What are some ways you think through that when you're approaching it? How you can make it?
Okay, that's a good question. I'm gonna take off my jacket real quick. I've written a lot of stuff, and most of it is crap. I think my wife said I've got like 5,000 columns that I've written, and all those are between 700 and 900 words. I've written about everything. I've written about ear hair. I wrote a whole column on ear hair, on nose hair. Like I said, most of it's crap. But I've learned a few things on how to make things interesting to me, at least. And one of the things that is fascinating that it took me way too long to figure out, I wish I'd have figured this out earlier, is if you make it, if let's say it's an interview, if you can bring in dialogue, you will hold someone's attention for a long, long time without them even knowing it. And I think the way I figured this out was I was on a flight and I was reading this cheap novel. It was garbage. But I was in it to win it, and I just could not put it down. And I finished the whole thing, and when I went back to read it, I realized half the book was dialogue. Half the book was in quotation marks. It was a conversation. And that held my attention. If he would have written long paragraphs and things, I would have just totally lost. So I figured when I'm writing certain things that have little forever value to people, the more dialogue I can bring in, maybe from talking with other people, like I'm recalling a conversation with my mother or my uncle or somebody in my life, or if I speak or write it as if I'm talking, like dialogue, people's attention it's a little more sustainable. Sustainable. I can't believe I got to use that word today. Yes.
As an agricultural communications student, we're kind of expected to follow a pretty strict associated press style
Yeah.
format. But
Yeah.
since I've taken a job at the diagnostics laboratory at A&M, I've kind of learned that, I can go out of
Yeah.
outside the box a little bit. What do you think is, I know you said you love commas.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Where is it acceptable to kind of bend the rules a little bit, and particularly with maybe changing the point of view, or and bashes are pretty popular.
Yeah. Well, first off, I love AP style, so I kind of got into it, and you kind of get to be a nerd about it, and you really start to like it, but it can be restrictive. When is it permissible to do that? I think in this day and age, people want a difference, and they want to see the rules be broken just a little bit. I think it's always permissible. I think I go back to the abbreviated keynote that I did. And this college professor really did give me the best advice of my entire life. She was a little woman like this. Her name was Miss Fish, Phish. Sweet, sweet woman. I showed up like 30 minutes early to my first college class. She was teaching us AP style. It was really cool. I was so excited to be there. This was my first college class. I was there early, and I sat there alone in the class, and she was doing her paper. She was like, "You're making me feel, you're kind of creepy, you know?" She said, "Why don't you come up here and tell me about yourself?" So I did. Told her I wanted to be a writer, and I was real excited to be here, and I'd been looking forward to being in this class. And she helped me. She took special attention with me, and I'll never forget, she said, "I like your work. You're using lots of flowery words. You're following all the rules. You're doing all the right things. But you know what? You talk real good. Why don't you just write how you talk? And we'll represent that with punctuation." And I started to do that. I mean, there's some times where you use the word "but," and it's a sentence. And that's okay. To say I was walking down the road and something fell in front of me and I was going to walk around it, but, something like that. It doesn't need any lips, or you can just attack it with the way you would speak. And I think today's readers want that. I think today's readers are so tired of inauthenticity that they're wandering through a desert and they're willing to drink the sand, whatever's presented to them. If you're authentic, if you smack of real authenticity, I think people will connect. Yeah. 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 So I had said this to some people last night after dinner. Louis L'Amour said this the best to me. Someone asked him, "Do you have writer's block?" And I find this to be true for me too. It's probably true for you since you're all writers, which, that, by the way, this is very intimidating talking to a lot of writers. He said, when I have writer's block, people say, well, what do you do to get rid of it? Where are you getting your ideas? Which is the number one question anybody asks any writer. Where do you get your ideas? Which is kind of a joke in the literary world. He said, and I would say this is true for me too, not that I'm anything like Louis L'Amour. His ideas came not before he turned on the faucet. You don't get your water before you turn on the faucet. You have to turn on the faucet first and let the water run for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, the water gets warm. You have ideas start to flow. You, through writing your whole life, have this symbiotic relationship that's formed with your fingers and the keyboard, or your wrist and the pen and the pad. You communicate with this. It's second nature. It's in your subconscious. When you start moving that wrist and writing, or you start moving your fingers and tapping, the ideas will begin to flow. And in the newspaper business, we call it the daily miracle. For some reason, you're writing and all of a sudden, you have nothing, but something's happening. Okay, that's a thread. I'll follow that. And you're following it, and it's led you somewhere completely different that you did not want it to go. And I would even say embrace that. When it leads you in a place you really don't want this thing going, just embrace it. It's fine. Let it go there, and you can come back and try another idea later on another piece. But just see where it's taking you, because your consciousness is moving. And what you're trying to do is, to prevent writer's block, in my mind, is communicate with the subconscious by being able to turn that faucet on and off. So I would say sometimes it's just best to get your fingers moving. Sometimes I'll even close my eyes and start just rattling off mindless language, and something will come, and then I'll remember, oh yeah, I had a conversation with a lady that went like this, and I'll bring that in and throw in a joke here, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that helps. There was somebody else back there. Yes.
So when we write fiction, we get to create these characters that are relatable to our audience, connect to the audience. How can we transfer those skills into nonfiction, news writing, feature stories, or writing about really cool things?
That's a good one. There's a saying in the book publishing world that if you want to read the truth, read fiction. But if you want to read lies, read nonfiction. You read more fiction when you read a nonfiction book than you do a fiction book, because when someone's writing nonfiction, they have to bend things to fit a story arc, and life doesn't follow a story arc. So they're bending events, they're manipulating situations. Well, let's move that over here. And the editors are encouraging them to do that because they want to sell books. So you're reading 35% true sometimes. I mean, it varies. I can't throw it across the board, but I do believe that there's truth in that. So that leads me to the next point, that it's all novel writing, in a way. Even when you're telling the truth, you are writing a fictional representation of the truth because it's on a page. I mean, you have to, you don't have total recall. So writing a novel or writing fiction is a good skill, a really good skill, I believe, for a nonfiction writer to have. Because in the end, it's all the same. Nobody writes good dialogue like a fiction writer. they write good dialogue that has punch with every few things. That's not how real dialogue goes, but it's good and it's entertaining to read, and it is based on the truth. And if you really work at it, you can be as close to the truth as you want to be, but still make your dialogue have punch. Whereas a lot of nonfiction writers, they totally miss dialogue, and dialogue is what makes us human. In a book, some of the most interesting spots are dialogue. That's just one example. So, what exactly was your question again? Because I love the sound of my own voice.
It was just how do you take those skills of creating these real people that feel so tangible
Yeah,
and transfer that into writing, like feature stories and news stories where we're writing about real.
yeah. Well, all fiction is character-driven. A good fiction is character-driven. There's some really good authors who are plot-driven, but the ones most Americans like are character-driven. It's all about the characters. When you're writing a feature story about somebody, following that device of novel writing where you make it a character-driven story, to me makes it, at least in the style that I like to do, it makes it more powerful. Like there was a column that I read by Mike Royko, and it was about when they landed on the moon. And he could have just said, "We landed on the moon. Isn't this amazing?" Instead, he went to a nursing home, and he found a farmer, I think it was Oklahoma, who had been a circuit riding preacher who was 90-some years old. And what was it, 1970 that we landed on the moon, 1969? He found this guy in this nursing home, and he tells this story about this guy and the guy's reaction to watching the moon landing. And it's all about this guy, but it's really about the moon. And he's saying this guy was a circuit riding preacher. He rode a mule and a horse from town to town. His daddy, plowed fields with a chisel plow and all that. And he goes through this guy's antiquated life, and then he tells this guy's reaction to seeing a black and white television where a man is walking on the moon. To me, that's a character-driven narrative rather than just my thoughts on that we landed on the moon. What else?
What have you done in the food and agriculture?
Actually, more than you'd think. When I first started, I was always writing, or I was always writing about rural people, farmers and things like that. I mean, nothing quite as technical as what you've been listening to today, most of which I don't even understand. That talk on sustainability was like listening to Japanese and Greek for me. It was fascinating. But when I would write about those things, I would write about basically my people. My people are rural people, boots, denim, everything's hard work. They did everything themselves. There's this work ethic thing that is so strong in them that they don't even want to eat food if it wasn't canned at the house, or something like that. I feel guilty every time I have a guy, because I travel so much, he cuts my grass. I feel ridiculously guilty every time he shows up with a lawnmower. He says, "I'm here to cut your grass." I say, "I'm sorry." Because my dad would want me to cut the grass. A man cuts the grass. A man does this, a man does that. But I honor those people. I've written a lot of stuff about them. That's about all I've done. Yes, somebody. Well, to me, so I've been in therapy for a long time. I had a traumatic childhood, and I started going to therapy when I was in my late 20s. When I was in therapy, a therapist, who's a dear, dear man, was saying, when you talk about things that you don't want to talk about, when you sense a topic that comes up in you that is off limits, you're touching an infection. And when you get to this infection, we know when there's an infection, you can't just leave it closed up. You have to lance that thing, get the pus and the infection out, and deal with it. So it's therapeutic, we know that, but it's cathartic in a way It's almost supernatural for me. To be able to write about something that hurts me deeply gives me a third-person perspective on pain, on the pain that I've gone through. And to have a third-person perspective on pain is almost to experience a flashing glimmer of omniscience, to know that everything's going to be okay for that person who's experiencing pain. You know it's going to work out. And it changes you to see it from a distance. And so when I began to write about vulnerable things, which I've written a lot about them, I experienced a healing that was like nothing I ever expected I would experience. Physical, mental, everything. And once you get on that track, it feels so good that even though it hurts, you want to keep doing it. That was kind of a downer, I'm sorry. Yes?
So I teach some writing classes, and we have a lot of students in here. So tips or tricks for teaching classes that aren't necessarily the most popular, and people who are going to be active communicators, hopefully.
Okay.
Reading and writing, I would say, they would probably say, are two of their least favorite things. Right?
Yeah, which is ironic because we do more writing today than we've ever done in history before. I mean, so I used to talk at schools, and kids would be like, I hate writing. And then I'd ask them to pull out their phone. And they rolled through their phone, and they had just typed 6,000 words that day in text conversations and social media posts. So, you hate writing, huh? I just can't stand it. And so I would have them pull out their phones, and I'd say, well, let's write a short story in text form. You're going to text it to so-and-so who's on the opposite side of the room. You get her number, she gets your number. The boys would be like, I got her number. And in a few hundred words, 100 words, they had a lot to say. And it was so good because language keeps changing, and I'm losing track of what the expressions are and all that. But that's all going to bleed into our normal everyday writing. It's already starting. I mean, I see the word like in writing all the time. I mean, like, like that. And like I just said, like, really. But I was fascinated at how well they wrote when they wrote just with their thumbs. So I started doing that wherever I'd go. I'd say, all right, bring out your phones. We're going to write a little story. It has to have a beginning and an end. You have to reference the beginning from your end and blah, blah, blah. I gave them a few guidelines, and just in this brief style, they did it with their thumbs, and they did it in like 10 seconds. That was a neat exercise. Another exercise that I like to do is to start, which you've probably done all this, start with an ending that you think would make a great punchline. To me, every story has to have a punchline. Every chapter has to have a punchline. Every column has to have a punchline. The last line is, to me, more important even than the first opening. Because if someone takes it all the way to the end, they want to feel a sense of completion. So, start with the punchline. So what would it be? Just random. And kids will pick a stream of consciousness punchline at the end. And then they have to write to that punchline. They have to use a certain amount of words. I loved seeing what they came up with. Some of it was not what I expected. Some of it was quite dirty. I don't know if that answers your question. What else we got? Yes?
In my writing, I find that I have to work around a lot of technical language, sometimes policy language that can't be changed very much.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any advice for working around those kinds of things and how to build a story, and especially because there's a background where it's explaining?
Well, I have my neighbor. She's a technical writer, and we often, we say we're both writers. And I look at what she does, and I think, holy God, you're a writer. I mean, you really are a writer. She's writing technical things. So how do you do that? How do you do that and not pull your hair out? And she said, well, this is all fake. So. One thing I learned, though, talking with her, watching her talk to some people about technical writing, was so incredibly simple to me, and she found that a lot of her students didn't do this, which I was, it kind of shocked. She said, if you say the gist of what you're about to say in your technical writing up front in your first paragraph, if you really state it in simple human terms by disregarding all the flowery language, and they know what this is actually about, then when you get to the middle sections where you're in the technical writing, you can deviate a little bit and kind of play with things because they know, oh, it's about this, and they'll follow that thread. That is not coming from me, though, so I don't know if that's good advice. That might ruin your career. What else? Yes.
So when you sit down to start a novel, that can be a very daunting task.
Yes.
Where do you begin? How do you begin that outline process?
I don't outline. Because all writing is improvisational. Even when you do outline, you're just giving yourself something that you will deviate from, at least for me. And when people follow an outline, you can tell it, and you can tell it. And life doesn't follow an outline, so especially in a novel. This is just my own opinion. Especially in a novel, if you're going for a life feel, one event leads to another event, leads to another event, and that's how life works. You did this, so that led to this, which led to that, and that led to this. You didn't outline it, because if you did, you'll miss the nuances that will lead you from another. So I've tried this. I tried outlining a novel one time. Whew, what a joke. And I followed it, and when I got to like the second point of my outline, I already realized, wow, I'm going another direction, and I just, So I liken it to a novel in particular. Is a novel, let's put it like this. A symphony takes about 3 years to write or a year to write for some people, and that's an hour's worth of music. And that what you're hearing when you hear that hour of music is 3 years of a guy's life. But when you listen to jazz, guys at a jazz gig, you're listening to their ideas happen right then, and you're listening to the rawness of them. But that leads to this thing that people are interested in. Novel writing is a lot like jazz, can be a lot like jazz, where you are throwing out an idea, and now you're going to play with that, and now you're going to see where that goes. Now, good jazz composers can take the contents of a jazz moment and turn it into a symphony. But symphonic guys have a really, really hard time playing jazz. I don't think that works. But anyway, there you go. Yes?
You interact with you have a lot of people that comment on your columns. Do you interact with them, and how do you go about inviting them to do that, or is it
There's a fine line for me because I don't have a super amount of confidence. So I used to read comments, and one bad comment can ruin your year. 5 can ruin your life. I did a series of commercials for Alabama Farmers Insurance, and they hired a crew that styled my hair, and they styled it like a televangelist. It was awful. And I was on these national commercial or these they played it during the Super Bowl, and they played it during the World Series. And these were my mother called and said, "What'd they do to your hair?" And they're awful. They're awful. And some guy on Twitter put out there, he said, "This guy has the largest head of any human being I've ever seen." Somebody said it looks like he took his face and dipped it into a can of red hair. And I would go up to the mirror and I just look at myself. I'd touch my face and I'd say, "Oh my God, my head is huge." And that someone comments on your writing like that, it can get to you, and it will steer you away from who you are, because you can write to please people. You can pander to an audience, and I don't recommend it because you have something to say. Even when you're writing about things that seem droll, you are a relevant voice in this world that is steering us in a hopefully wonderful direction that we need you. We need your voice, especially in such times of tenseness between people. So reading comments can be the end of you. So I try very hard not to read the comments. I try doubly hard not to read any good comments, because good comments can poison you even worse than bad comments. If someone says you're awesome, you're great, and if you believe that, you're screwed. Luckily, that's not a problem for me. We don't have that many comments coming, especially not today. What else we have? Yes.
So when you got started out, like in your early career, how did you find people to like professionally critique your work and like show you what needed improvement?
I didn't, and I did that on purpose. Let me back up. A lot of people will write to me and say, will you critique my work? I wrote this, will you critique my work? I said, well, if you want to hear how awesome you are, then that's what you're going to get from me. If you really want like a deep dive into what you did wrong, you're not going to hear that from me, because I know how hard this is. I know how hard it is what you just did. And what you did when you sent this to me was you followed your own voice, and your voice was speaking. Who am I to say that that's wrong? Who am I to say that my style or my taste or my preference has any bearing on what you do? So the first things that I wrote, I trusted my inner voice. I worked as my own editor. And I don't even let my wife read my work, because I value her opinion so much that if she were to give my opinion, I would begin to write to please my wife. And she's got a big opinion on everything. And that would only create tension in our marriage. So I didn't trust anybody until I started. You have to go through the editing process when you're in a published world. And that is where it's so important to find someone you really trust. If you have any way of choosing the relationship between you and an editor, that can make or break you. I have an editor who's worked with me for a long time. I trust her and completely. And when she says one thing, I get it. I don't think I've ever balked anything she's ever said. I roll with it because I trust her. The first novel I ever wrote, I try for levity in a little bit of everything I do. And her first note to me during our first relationship, I'll never forget it. I have it framed. It's in my office. It said, "You used too many fart jokes." I thought, I've arrived, baby. Since then, I've tried to tone down the bathroom humor, but I would say don't worry about people critiquing your work. Follow this. Follow your voice, and when the time comes to where you're publishing and someone needs to come in and tell you, I would say make that person work to earn your approval, don't work to earn their approval. That's my thoughts. Yes?
Following along that, like we can all be our own worst critics. How do you avoid not?
I don't know, because I can't stand anything I've ever written. Everything I've written, I read it and I think, that's garbage. I just finished reading my latest novel in Nashville last week. I recorded the audiobook. They're long sessions of recording, 8-hour days. And when I was done, the lady who was from LA, who was like, in my ear, she said, well, how did you like it? I said, that was crap. I don't know why y'all published this. I mean, that was bad. If I would have read that book, I would have thought, this is a bad book. So I realized either I'm not objective or the publishing industry really has gone to crap. And it's probably a little of both. But in a way, I'm really grateful for that harsh criticism that I have of myself, because I did a literary event, and I can't name a name, but it was a really well-known author, and I was the little guy on this panel. And when they asked him questions, he had all this big stuff to say, and you could tell this guy just loves himself. He loves his work, and it was gagalicious. I mean, the people in the audience were eating it up. They were with him, but for me, as a consumer, I'm listening to it, and he'd lost all credibility with me, because someone who it's like Shakespeare said, only the wise person, or only the fool thinks he's wise. It's the fool or the wise person who knows he's a fool. If I got that right, yeah. If you think you got it figured out, you're screwed. And if you know that you don't know what the hell you're doing, you're probably okay. So the self-critiquing is good. I read that Norman Rockwell was never satisfied with a single portrait or painting he ever did. He never liked any single one of them. And I think he's a good example for me to live by. Yeah. Yeah, go to lunch or not. Thank you for having me. Yes.